Hey y'all, it's Amanda and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here, and let's talk all things spring book recommendations. Alright y'all, so spring is right around the corner, okay? Or if you're anything like me, you get kind of that fake spring in Tennessee, cold, warm, don't know what it's doing, but hey, with spring right around the corner, let's go ahead and talk about some spring book recommendations. I will be doing a spring TBR video at the end of this month. For now, let's talk about what I would recommend for you to read this spring. Honestly, I don't know that any of these are set in the spring. I think I know one is for sure, but some of these are historical. Like for me, spring is kind of like historical, romance, little bit of nonfiction, because it's kind of like that renewal period, people say. I don't know, it's like, you know, you kind of get the sun, the flowers, all the good things. And so anything I thought was like, hey, I might have read that in the spring, or you could read this in the spring, I just threw it in here. So no rhyme or reason, honestly. Let's just go ahead and get into it. I think some of these will be great books to read during the springtime, so let's go ahead and get into it. First, we'll talk about some secular book recommendations. I think I only have two, and the rest of this should be Christian book recommendations or Christian nonfiction. I got two Christian nonfiction on this as well. So first, let's talk about The Bodyguard by Katherine. I think this is just a wonderful book to read during the springtime. All the florals and stuff on the front really give that spring essence about it, you know, anyway. But this is a cute little romance. It's got fake dating in it. I think, let me just pull the synopsis up. It's the best way. She's got his back. He's got her heart. They've got a secret. What could possibly go wrong? Hannah Brooks, and she is hired to protect a superstar actor named Jack Stapleton from this stalker, okay? So Jack's mom is sick. He's kind of dropped away from the paparazzi, but he's still got this crazy stalker. And so he doesn't want his family to know about the stalker or the bodyguard thing. So he has to pretend to date her, and the rest is history. It's a really good time. Highly recommend. I think it might have a little bit of language in it, but nothing else. The romance in this was clean, and I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars when I read it. And the other secular book recommendation I have is A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting by Sophie Irwin. I would not really recommend the second book in this series from some of the content that I've seen, but this one is a solid Bridgerton clean alternative from what I've seen and heard from other people. And when I read this last year, I really enjoyed it. I think I gave it 4 stars during the time. This was so much fun. I laughed quite a bit. We have this girl named Kitty, and she needs a fortune, okay, honey? Rather, she needs a husband with a fortune. So she is left with all her father's massive debts, and she only has 12 weeks to save herself and her sisters from financial ruin. And so she has never been one to back down from a challenge, as it says in the synopsis. She ends up going towards the battleground of dating in London, okay? One thing she don't anticipate is Lord Radcliffe, who sees Kitty for the fortune hunter that she is. My mind, I can't talk. Vows to like get her out of here. We ain't doing this. He's like, I know what you up to, girl. But then things kind of take a turn, and it's a really great story. I love this one. I got 4 stars, and it was just so much fun. The Christian ones, okay, let's get into it, because you know me, I got all the Christian book recs, okay, clean Christian book recs. So first I want to talk about this historical one. This is set in the spring, and this cover is giving spring for me, so there's no reason. Do I need a reason? Let's just talk about it. Jennifer Deibel by The Lady of Galway Manor by Jennifer Deibel. Okay, Amanda. So I have filmed already like 3 videos today, so that's why. This is a Christian historical romance set in Ireland, and I haven't talked about it in a little bit, okay? I've talked about her new releases and stuff, the last 2, but this was her second release in, I think, 2022, and I really enjoyed this. This is all about Annabeth de Lacy, and her father is appointed landlord of Galway Parish in Ireland. So she ends up convincing her father to let her work at this jewelry place as an apprentice, in an apprenticeship, I should say, with the Jennings family. And they are descendants of creating this famous Claddagh ring, okay? So she ends up going and working there. Her and Stephen kind of hit it off. It's kind of like forbidden love a little bit, because like they really ain't supposed to be together, because he don't really have a lot of money, her family got a lot of money, and that kind of storyline. And the war for Irish independence is starting to gain strength, and the de Lacy family is kind of caught in the crossfire, and everything kind of goes on from there. It is so good. I love the romance in this. It was very precious, and there was a really great allegory moment. I don't know if it's allegory. There was a really great moment just representing the salvation in Jesus. I loved it. I remember that, just loving that, tying it in with the cross and everything, and the jewelry making. It was just beautiful. So yeah, definitely a great one for spring. Next, let's talk about a contemporary option. Okay, The Extraordinary Death of Mrs. Kipp by Sara Brunsvold. You already know, I've talked a lot about this, that this definitely took the world by storm when it first came out, and I'm reading her new release right now and I'm enjoying it. But this one is just one that sticks with me, will always stick with me. Mrs. Kipp's love and just her passion for life, her fervor for life, will always stay with me. She's an inspiration for so many people. And in this one, we have Aidan Kelly, who is this journalist who's ready for more, and she is tasked with writing Mrs. Kipp's obituary because she knows that she's going to die, and she really is like, oh, that's beneath me, I don't want to do this, you know. So at first you're like, look here, Aidan, you need to get together, girl. But as she gets to know Mrs. Kipp, she really sees her story and just grows in that process, and I loved it. It's a heartwarming, it'll make you cry, but it's just a heartwarming story. You really see why the Lord brought Mrs. Kipp into Aidan's life by the end of this story. It was so, so good. Contemporary romance recommendation I have not talked about in a little bit, and that is A Girl's Guide to the Outback by Jessica Kate. This is a lot of fun, you know. It's one I'd like to reread, I think. It was fun. I have another one, Love and Other Mistakes, on my shelf I haven't read yet, but this is set in Australia, and you don't see a lot of books like that. So yeah, I had a good time with this. It's Samuel Payton. He's a youth pastor. This is co-worker Kimberly. Opposites attract romance. They work together. He ends up leaving and going back home, and then there's like some trouble with the family farm. There's like a ministry because he is a passionate youth pastor, but then like they end up split. He quits the ministry and heads home to Australia to help his sister save the struggling family farm. That's it. Kimberly, her plans are all messed up because she needs him to come back home to help them with their youth business and stuff they've got going on. Kind of tries her hand at farm life. It's funny. It's a good time. Highly recommend if you want a Christian romance that's set in Australia. You don't really see that a lot, so yeah, this is a really good one. Now let's talk about Fairest of Heart by Karen Whitmire. This is a Snow White retelling, Western style, and you know, I did recently talk about I'm going to be reading book 2, which is If the Boot Fits, which is more of a Cinderella style, but this one is the first one in the series, and I just have to tell y'all, it is so good. It definitely feels like a spring or summer book. I highly recommend this. Look at the cover. We'd love to see it. It's just giving all things Snow White and spring, the butterfly, the flowers, yes. And so this is set in Texas, and we have our girl Penelope Snow, and she is a personal maid for this famous actress whose troupe is leaving Chicago to tour the West. And so she ends up, like, she hides her figure under all these shapeless dresses and everything. Nobody really knows what she really looks like, and she ends up attracting the wrong attention, we'll say. Her mistress ends up getting jealous. Her name's Narcissa, well, you know, duh, she jelly. And so she ends up telling her she needs to get out of here. She sends her off, and the girl Penelope ends up in this little town with Texas Ranger Titus Kingsley. He ends up helping her with these 7 old drovers. Was that what they called it? Yeah, drovers living in his grandfather's ranch. It was so cute. I love the romance. I love the grandfather figures in this. It's just such a great historical romance. You won't regret reading this. It's so good. Let's talk about A Castaway in Cornwall by Julie Klassen. I really enjoyed this. It definitely gives Poldark vibes to me. I had never read anything like this set in Cornwall, and I mean, after watching Poldark, I really felt like it was a Poldark story. In this, we have this lady named Laura Calloway, and she lives with her uncle. She feels like this castaway there because, you know, they don't get along and all this stuff. She feels like she's always viewed as an outsider there because she's different and she just wants to belong. And so we see that wreckers are searching for valuables across the Cornwall coast, and it's known for shipwrecks, so that's why they usually are out there looking. Well, then one day there's a man that's washed ashore after a shipwreck, and Laura is wanting to protect him from becoming a victim of being smuggled and all this stuff. Laura jumps in to try to help him recover from this, and the rest is history as they get to know each other. I would say it's more of a slow burn because we're trying to figure out who this guy is for most of the book, but I still really enjoyed this. I think I give it 4 stars. It was a really great story, and it feels like spring to me because it's like that time, it's like that fake spring. So like when you get the warm day and you go back to the cold day, here we are. So she's like, I don't know why I'm trying to make this up at this point. I'm just making this up at this point. But I just wanted to put a Julie Klassen in here more than anything. This is set in October. Why am I putting this in here? Read it anyway. It's good. It just feels like it, okay? Anyway, next, we're going to talk about Waves of Mercy by Lynn Austin. When is this even said? Does it say? It don't say. I'll be good on this one. So I haven't talked about Waves of Mercy in a while, but Lynn Austin, I read her new release recently, and All My Secrets, I think is what it's called. This one is my first Lynn Austin I ever read, and it's what made me just love her books. This is a duology. So you have Waves of Mercy and then Legacy of Mercy. And dual timeline story, we have Keisha and Anna and Dirk Vanderveen in 1897 Holland, Michigan. And Keisha is writing down the memories of her life in the Netherlands 50 years ago for this Centennial group. And Lynn Austin weaved these stories together so perfectly because you really just love learning about Keisha's life and then going back and kind of seeing what Anna and Dirk are doing in that timeline. I'm rooting for them and their romance. They're not merely meant to be together, kind of a forbidden love again in this. She is, I think, supposed to be engaged to someone else, and she doesn't really want to be engaged to that guy, and then she starts to realize this, and so we just see all these things unfold with that. She's learning about her new faith, and she wants to learn more about the scriptures, and Dirk is, I won't say Derek, but Dirk is helping her throughout that process. I would say that this is primarily more of a historical fiction story than historical romance, but it does have a nice romance thread throughout the two books. You really don't, you need to read book 2 for everything to be completed, right? But I really enjoyed these two books. They are just wonderful. All right, Dear Henry, Love Edith, talked a lot about it. Okay, read it. It's a perfect spring read, summer read, romance, all the things. It's like you've got mail. It's so cute. It's just like them writing back and forth. Henry and Edith are writing back and forth, and they don't know that the other is not the same age. They think each other's elderly. You get to see them actually interact together, not knowing that they've been writing back and forth on another day, like to each other separately. They don't know. It's just this whole thing, and so it's just really sweet, charming. I laughed, all the good things. Highly recommend. I can't say enough. I've already talked a lot about this, but it's a really cute Christian rom-com. Highly recommend. All right, now we have got a Regency story because, you know, spring Regency, right? I'm just throwing that in there, making that up too. But I think that Abigail Wilson is an author to read any time of the year, honestly. And I want to mention Within These Gilded Halls, okay? I love this story. Read it last year. I think I gave it 4 stars, but it was really interesting. Our girl Phoebe Radcliffe, and she's renovating a ballroom for her art teacher, Miss Drake. Mrs. Drake ends up being murdered, and she provides a clue to Phoebe with her last dying breath, and the story goes on from there. It is intense. So many questions in this. Who killed Miss Drake? Is there a rumored treasure that they talked about within the halls? Is that real? Who can we trust? Will Miss Drake's charming nephew, Lieutenant Graham Burke, and Phoebe end up being able to work together and get all these answers, right? We kind of get like Julie Klassen, Agatha Christie, Jane Austen type vibes from Abigail Wilson. So I really want to read more of her books because they are always just a really good time. I really enjoy them. I also think that springtime is a great time for a biblical fiction, and I want to remind you about Tosca Lee's Iscariot. It's all about Judas Iscariot and his time with Jesus and who he was, and you really see him at a different lens. It's unlike anything I've ever read before in a biblical fiction. I sobbed. It's my favorite biblical fiction story I've ever read, honestly. It's so impactful. I mean, it really makes you see that we're all not too different from Judas. The only thing that separates us and Judas is the redemption in Jesus Christ from his blood on the cross. That's it. That's it, you know, and our salvation in Jesus. Like, yeah, y'all got to read this. If you haven't read it, this is my reminder to read it. Okay? I didn't want to close this out without fantasy and 2 nonfictions, so we're going to talk about that. So a fantasy that I want to recommend is Resistance by J.L. Knight, a non-magical Christian fantasy. So I know some of you all have asked for those recommendations in the past, and this series is 6 books. Maybe more. I don't know. I know there's at least 4, 5, 6 books in this series, and I need to continue on, but it's pretty chunky, but it is wonderful. So good. Even if you're not someone who is into fantasy, I think you could go on with this because it is more of a fantastical world set in medieval times versus fantasy elements you might not be able to understand in that story. This is easy to understand for me, especially because I'm not one who's like into like in-depth fantasy sometimes. I have a hard time understanding it at times, and this one it was easy to understand. And so the Christian allegory in this is top tier. It has like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego type of story in this. You know, these people are not going to bow down to false gods in this story, so I was totally here for this. In this, we follow Corinne and her brother Caden, and they are training in Tarvin Hall, and they are believers in Elam, which is allegory to God, right? But they have to keep their belief hidden. Things get crazy when Chiron is forced to work for the Emperor Dican to read people. Reminds you of like Daniel, right? Interpreting dreams and stuff like that. The Emperor wants people to worship the false gods, and anyone that doesn't is sentenced to death. that story goes on here. Then we have this half human, half animal guy named Jace. Does he have a soul? There's all this like back and forth with him, and people doubt that he has a soul. He's always been looked down upon, but he is a believer in Elam, and he has this mentor named Rayad who is like a father figure for him. He's a wanted man, but a man of faith, and he ends up helping him throughout the process as well. Things get crazy when all the characters kind of end up together, and it's a great story. You got to read it. I need to read book 2. That's all I'll say. And my 2 Christian nonfiction books to end this off are Joy in Christ's Presence by Spurgeon and Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland. I have loved both of these books. I say that Gentle and Lowly was probably my favorite nonfiction of 2022. Joy in Christ's Presence was my favorite nonfiction of 2023. All I can say is look how much I have highlighted, y'all. It's a whole thing. Love the live streams that they had on this. This is a read along last year that Tiffany, Adia, and Chrissy had. I will leave those down below for you to check out. But just so impactful of a story. Just how can we truly experience joy in the Lord? And there's just, I can't even say enough about how like little Amanda was healed by reading this. Honestly, there was so much that my heart was transformed by reading this book. It was amazing. And then there were also, this was also a read along, Gentle and Lowly was for Krista at Books and Jams, and I actually was able to participate in at least one or two, I can't remember if it was 1 or 2, but I know I did at least one of the live streams on this in 2022, and we talked about several of the chapters. I think it was 2 I got to participate in, I'm pretty sure. It's all surrounding the scripture, Matthew 11:28, come to me all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Christians know what Jesus Christ has done, but who is he? What is his deepest heart for his people? Weary and faltering on the journey toward heaven, Jesus said he is gentle and lowly in heart. This book really goes in depth about that scripture, the true heart of Christ. I love this so much. I will also leave the live streams for this down below if you want to check that out. But yeah, that is all of my recommendations for spring. I have plenty more, I'm sure, but I just kind of randomly grabbed some books off my shelves and wanted to share with you guys some. So let me know if you've read any of these books or if any of them sound interesting to you, or if you're just reminded, oh yeah, I need to pick that one up. We can chat below in the comments as always. Again, my spring TBR will be coming out in maybe 1 or 2 weeks, but I want to go ahead and get this video out there for you guys to be checking out so that you can plan your spring TBR. And let's chat below in the comments as always. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on my next video. Bye, y'all.